Bethesda have just released a whole load of new information on Starfield. It includes the ability to purchase housing, information on the history of mechs, how smuggling is going to work, and much more. All of this came in the form of a Q&A over on the official Bethesda Discord, with the answers being provided by Starfield's developers. So let's start with question 1. Can we buy houses or property in the main cities? Now the answer to that is yes. There's housing in different cities that the player can get. Some you have to purchase and some are rewards for specific quests. Now you may remember this came up as a question after people watched one of the animated shorts where we saw a character sitting inside a rather luxurious apartment. And let's not forget, we've also seen the signs pointing towards apartments in some of the showcase footage, so it's nice to have this confirmed. It means that with Starfield we're going to have the ability to build our own ships, build our own bases, but also directly buy apartments and housing. And all of this really does speak to the scope of just what Starfield is offering. The second question was about character creation, or more to the point, not about the character itself, but rather about the character's appearance. Specifically, will the appearance look anything like the character we create? Well, it turns out that yes, it is going to be the case. The game has the ability to match your custom face and create for you some parents who look somewhat like you, and that is pretty interesting. It also seems that the player's parents are going to have a pretty significant role within the game, as one of the developers specifically mentions the voice actors that were hired for the parents, so yes, they're going to make at least one appearance. Moving on to information about smuggling. How is the smuggling system going to work, and can players hide cargo aboard their ship? Well, yes, it turns out that certain items are considered contraband, and you're going to need to smuggle these past security, specifically security ships that are in orbit of major settlements. If an item is considered contraband, then it will be legal more or less everywhere. But if you can find a market for these, it seems as though you're about to make a profit for selling them. It seems though that getting the cargo past security is certainly going to be an issue. With that in mind, there are special modules that you can include aboard your ship where you can hide the illicit cargo. Another thing that was mentioned here is about the economy. It turns out the economy is fixed, so that means prices won't be going up and down. However, you can have certain traits that will allow you, certain skills rather, that will allow you to change the amount of money that you can get when you sell a good. So ultimately this pretty much confirms that there isn't a dynamic, massive economy going on inside the game. It's not simulating an economy, but nonetheless there's going to be the ability to trade and make money doing so. And what's more, smuggling sounds as though it's going to be pretty fun. But of course, with the ability to commit crime comes the question of what is going to be the punishment. Is there going to be a jail system? Well yes, it turns out that, much like the system that Bethesda used with Skyrim, if you're caught committing a crime, you can choose to go to jail or pay a fine. You're also going to have the option to resist arrest, although that means you're then going to have to escape. Now another thing this bit of information does confirm that is, if you're going to prison, then you're going to need to wait that time out for a few days. Pretty much confirms that Starfield, much like Fallout and Elder Scrolls, is thus going to have a wait system. This is basically the ability to press a key and choose how many days you want your character to wait around, and you'll then skip that time. The idea of going to jail pretty much does confirm that this system is going to be present, as after all, how are you going to get through all those multiple days in the prison system without the ability to skip that time in game? And talking of time passing in game, a question was asked as to whether or not time will pass when you're not in the game. It turns out that, much like Fallout and much like Elder Scrolls, and as to be expected really, that time will not pass when you're outside the game, and time only runs when you're actively playing. This makes sense, as after all, Starfield is an entirely single-player game, but it also means that resources will not be harvested, grown or collected whilst you're outside of the game, and that's not going to be simulated. Now, going back to gameplay, you may remember in the Elder Scrolls series as well as the Fallout series that it was possible to join a whole different bunch of factions. All of these exist within the game world, and some of them are at odds with each other. Some of them have very different ideologies. Now, will you be able to join one of these factions and then betray another? Well, 2 points to all of this. All of the factions are playable and can be joined as well as played entirely independently. Now, as with the other Bethesda games, this is pretty significant because many of the factions do have a whole load of quest and story stuff going on, so there's a lot of content that would otherwise be missed. Now, rather interestingly, yes, it will be possible to join one of the specific factions or two and infiltrate it to betray another. It doesn't seem this is going to be possible with every single faction, but it does seem as though it's going to be a pretty important part of the story. I'm not going to mention which factions these are, as well I'd like to avoid those types of spoilers in this video, but yeah, do keep in mind that this is going to be an option and it will be a thing. So yes, there will be multiple ways of playing through the game, and this quite naturally led to the question as to whether or not the game is going to feature a pacifist mode. Will players be able to play the game beginning to end without killing anyone? Well, developers said that this is something they did talk about and it is something that they did consider, but ultimately they decided that it just wouldn't be feasible with the type of game that they're trying to create. That said though, there are a lot of situations where you can talk your way out of combat and talk your way out of conflict. So whilst combat and fighting is a big part of the game, you'll quite often be able to avoid it if you have the necessary skills. But the bottom line here is that combat isn't entirely unavoidable, and if you want to complete the game, you will need to get involved with it sooner or later. Moving on to the subject of companions. As you remember from other Bethesda games, you can have a companion, and we've seen some of these mentioned in Starfield. Basically, these are the NPCs that will accompany you and help you on your journey. Now, it turns out that Starfield has 20 named characters, all of who can join you and your crew. Now, some of these will be able to help you in different ways. There are some, for example, might be able to help you with fighting. They'll be able to watch your back. Others may be able to help you on board your ship. So when they join your crew, they may be able to increase your jump range due to their specific skills. It turns out also that anytime a crew member joins you, if they have a relevant skill that you also have, the benefits for that skill will also stack with yours. All of this means then that companions are going to provide some pretty unique options for you when you play through Starfield. It's not just a case that they're going to accompany you as a bodyguard or just someone to carry your stuff, but rather that they will make a significant impact on your playthrough. They'll have an effect on your bases, have an effect on your ships, and also genuinely and generally be a companion for you along your journey, so quite a mix there. Now, with all these companions dotted about and helping you out, you may be wondering whether or not they're going to demand a salary from you. It turns out that Bethesda felt it unnecessary to have ongoing salaries, that they didn't really want you having to keep grinding out the credits just so that you can pay your companions. Instead, they've gone for the option of having a single one-off payment that you'll have when you initially hire them, and this can even be further reduced if you meet these certain speech challenges and negotiate a lower price. Either way though, whatever amount you end up paying initially up front to hire the crew, I think it's a fantastic idea that we're not going to be stuck grinding out those credits just to continuously pay them, and that's really going to allow us to concentrate on other areas of the game. And this is something that Bethesda specifically said. They said, there's a lot to do in Starfield and we wanted to minimise what the player had to constantly keep track of. In other words, we don't want you grinding and avoiding missing out on some of the main parts of the game. And finally, we come to the question that pretty much interested me the most throughout this whole Q&A session, and that is, what is the history of the Mechs? I'm going to read out the entire reply here from the devs. So the devs said, we tried to show this a bit in one of the animated shorts, and yes, that was pretty interesting. The Mechs are leftovers from the Colony Wars. Note it's Colony War, not Colony Wars, singular. Both sides, United Colonies and Freestar Collective, had Mechs, but the Freestar Collective really mastered them. The United Colonies had Mechs too, but they also relied on the controlled alien beasts from their Xeno Warfare division. Both of these were outlawed with the armistice that ended the Colony War. They went on to say, I'm not saying there's old mech battleground in the game, I'm typing it, but also went on to confirm that mechs are not usable, they're in ruins. So it's really nice to have end to that particular bit of speculation, as some people were wondering whether or not mechs might be playable in the game. It turns out that no, that's not the case, but they're going to be some really interesting structures to form some of the background and the environment. Now there's a few other bits and pieces, questions in there, and I'll link the Discord below if you want to try and find a summary of these questions. Some of them basically just asking what the developers' favourite parts of the game are. I'm not going to go into too much detail on that right here. Overall though, I really do feel this was a really good Q&A and gave us some nice insight as to what we can expect from Starfield. Unfortunately, there's still a few questions that weren't answered, things such as whether or not we can fully walk around a planet. And I know some people are wondering, what does that even matter? Most people are not going to want to walk around a planet. What an answer to that would give us is whether or not when we land we're contained within small maps, or whether or not we have absolutely large full-sized planet maps. On a similar note, I've also been wondering whether or not we can 3D fly from planet to planet, or whether or not we need to make mini jumps within star systems to do that. Both of these are questions that unfortunately were not answered during the Q&A. Now, some people may speculate that the very fact those questions weren't even present within the Q&A might suggest that the things aren't possible, and that we may be contained to small, limited maps, both in space as well as on planets. But personally, I wouldn't jump to that conclusion just yet. The absence of those questions there doesn't necessarily mean that. Either way, before too much longer, we will have the answers for ourselves, as the launch date for Starfield is getting much closer. That's the 1st of September for anyone who has the premium version, and the 6th of September for everyone else. That then pretty much covers everything we know to date, all the nice new pieces of information. Do let me know what you think about all of this in the comments section below. I'd love to hear from you. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys and girls next time.